When American Eagle rolled out its newest ad starring Sydney Sweeney herself, what was supposed to be cheeky and harmless turned into one of the most talked about marketing controversies of the summer. When it comes to denim, American Eagle has always had a certain cultural footprint. They're not luxury, they're not bargain bin. They're the mall brand that's been around long enough to feel familiar to multiple generations. But in an age where mall traffic is declining and fast fashion competitors are everywhere, American Eagle needed something new to make them stand out once again. Enter Sydney Sweeney. Best known for her roles in Euphoria and The White Lotus, Sydney has spent the last few years turning herself into one of Hollywood's most marketable young stars. She's known for blending a nostalgic bombshell aesthetic with Gen Z's social media savvy, which makes her appealing to both young audiences and brands hoping to tap into that mix of vintage and modern. The campaign concept seemed simple enough on the surface. Play on the phrase good genes as in genetics and swap it for good jeans as in pants. It's a classic marketing trick, funny wordplay and minimal set design. The style of the campaign leaned into a slightly retro feel, nodding to the denim ads of the 80s and 90s. American Eagle launched the ad in late July of 2025, clearly aiming for a mix of humor, social media shareability, and nostalgia for older audiences who grew up seeing similar campaigns. On paper, it checked every box: celebrity endorsement, tone, cultural familiarity, but as we all know, advertising does not exist in a vacuum. And in today's political climate, neither does a pun. Within hours of the campaign launch, social media reactions started rolling in. For some, the ad was cute, clever, and worth a quick repost, and it wasn't much more than just an ad. However, for others, it was instantly unsettling. For most people, the problem wasn't just the genes, it was the genes, as in DNA. That phrase, good genes, has a long and troubling history. In early 20th century America, eugenics movements used similar language to promote the idea that certain traits, physical and genetic, were inherently superior and therefore should be preserved through selective breeding. So in that context, good genes was propaganda. So when you pair that phrase with an actress who embodies traditional Western beauty ideals, white-skinned, blonde hair, blue eyes, made the ad feel uncomfortably aligned with those old messages, even if unintentionally. And while American Eagle almost certainly, well, hopefully, didn't set out to evoke eugenics history, intention isn't the only thing that matters in advertising. As cultural critics pointed out, ads don't get to control their interpretation once they're in the wild. The timing also didn't help either. Conversations about representation, diversity, and privilege in media are more prominent than ever. In a year where brands are being constantly scrutinized for their casting and messaging choices, centering a campaign on the blonde, blue-eyed American girl archetype, especially with a genetics-themed pun, felt to some like a step backwards. If this had stayed a Twitter debate, it might have blown over in a week, at the most. But the ad quickly jumped from fashion discourse into political talking points. Conservative commentators started to praise the campaign, calling it refreshingly unwoke and a return to celebrating traditional beauty. President Donald Trump even weighed in himself, applauding the ad and positioning it as a win in the culture wars. That endorsement quickly shifted the campaign into a political symbol. Suddenly, people were beginning to debate what it represented in the broader cultural landscape. The result? A spike in brand mentions, online engagement, and even American Eagle's stock value. But, of course, there was the cost. For some, the brand had now been co-opted into a very public political narrative. Whether American Eagle wanted it or not, their ad was being used as a rallying image by one side of America's polarized culture war. Part of what made the ad so combustible is the cultural archetype at its center, the blonde bombshell. In advertising, the blonde, blue-eyed, all-American woman has been an enduring symbol of beauty and desirability. Think Marilyn Monroe in the 50s, Farrah Fawcett in the 70s, and countless denim ads in between. It's an image loaded with cultural baggage. On the surface, sure, it's glamorous, it's pretty, but it's also deeply tied to exclusionary beauty standards, standards that have historically centered whiteness as the default ideal. American Eagle's campaign echoed the aesthetic of classic Calvin Klein and Guess ads. Minimalist visuals, confidence, and a kind of effortless sensuality. But where those older campaigns existed in an era of less public critique, today's audiences are much more likely to dissect what those images represent and who they lead out as a result. And adding to the irony itself, some reportings even revealed that part of the proceeds from the campaign were meant to support domestic violence prevention programs. It's a cause worth spotlighting, but that detail was buried, never making it into the campaign's main messaging. If the brand had leaned harder into that aspect, then I'm sure the conversation around this ad would have been entirely different. American Eagle also issued a statement clarifying that the campaign was intended to celebrate individuality and self-expression, not to make any commentary on genetics or politics. No, they didn't pull the ad, and I didn't expect them to, and they certainly did not apologize. Sydney Sweeney herself has stayed silent on the matter, publicly focusing on her career and personal life. She was even seen singing karaoke with her co-stars in the days following the backlash, seemingly unaffected by the online discourse swirling around her image. For critics, her silence read as indifference. For supporters, it was a sign she wasn't going to let internet outrage dictate her moves. On a more serious note, it's also important to realize that the controversy didn't just stay confined to screens. In a specific case in California, one of the campaign's billboards was vandalized with extremist slogans referencing the ad. The phrases used were linked to far-right groups, turning the already loaded pun into an even more explicit political statement. This incident underscored how quickly online discourse can spill into the physical world. What began as a playful marketing campaign had now been repurposed as propaganda, completely outside of the brand's control. So why in the world did this particular ad become such a flashpoint? Well, a few reasons stand out. First, the imagery. The combination of good jeans wordplay with a model who fits the most stereotypical all-American look is an easy trigger for conversations about beauty, race, and history. Second, the cultural moment itself. Audiences are hyper-aware of how representation functions in media. They're also primed to read deeper meanings into branding, especially when those meanings intersect with ongoing political debates. Third, the political environment as well. Almost any high-profile media moment can be seized and reframed by political actors. The American Eagle ad became a vessel for talking points on both sides, one side calling it nostalgic and bold, the other calling it regressive and coded. And finally, the internet's amplification effect. Social media thrives on conflict, and this ad offered a perfect combination of celebrity, branding, and controversy to spark endless discourse. In the end, American Eagle got something money cannot always buy: mass attention. But it came at the cost of losing control over the narrative. The good jeans pun may have started as a harmless, clever hook, but it still became a case study in how marketing can be swept into the political current, whether the brand intends it or not. It showed how cultural symbols, blonde hair, blue eyes, and conversations surrounding genetics carry histories that can't be separated from their modern use. It also proved that in today's environment, brands cannot afford to be unaware of how their imagery will be interpreted, remixed, and weaponized. The line between lighthearted marketing and cultural controversy is thinner than ever. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. It's not enough for an ad to be clever, funny, or nostalgic. In a hyper-connected, hyper-politicized world, even your safe ideas can become someone else's political billboard. So, was this a harmless pun that got blown out of proportion, or was it a tone-deaf campaign that deserved the scrutiny? Comment your thoughts down below. Maybe it's both, but either way, one thing is crystal clear. Even your jeans can be a political statement.